First story, by John Smith. It was a moonless night, and the only source of illumination was the faint glow from my car's headlights. I was driving alone on a long, desolate highway that seemed to stretch on forever. My knuckles were white as they gripped the steering wheel, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. I had been on the road for hours, and there was no sign of civilization in sight. The road was flanked by dense woods on both sides, and the trees loomed ominously in the darkness. It was the kind of place where you half expected something to jump out at you from the shadows. As I continued to drive, I noticed a figure up ahead. It was a hitchhiker, standing by the side of the road with their thumb out. In a moment of hesitation, I debated whether to pick them up. But then my sympathy got the best of me, and I pulled over. The hitchhiker approached the car, and I could finally see their face. It was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with long disheveled hair and tattered clothing. She looked like she had been through a rough patch in life. Her eyes, though, held a strange intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Without saying a word, she got into the car. I tried to make polite small talk, but she remained silent, staring out of the window. The atmosphere inside the car grew increasingly uncomfortable as we continued down the dark highway. Suddenly she spoke, her voice low and raspy. "You shouldn't have picked me up." My heart began to race, and I stole a glance at her. She was still staring out of the window, but there was a sinister smile on her face that chilled me to the bone. "What do you mean?" I stammered. She turned to me, her eyes devoid of emotion. "You're not going to make it out of here." Before I could react, she lunged at me, her hands gripping my throat. I struggled to breathe as she squeezed tighter, her strength far greater than her appearance suggested. Panic surged through me as I fought to break free, desperately reaching for the car's door handle. In a final burst of adrenaline, I managed to push her away and flung open the door. I tumbled out of the car and onto the cold, unforgiving asphalt. Gasping for air, I scrambled to my feet and sprinted away from the scene, not looking back. I didn't stop running until I reached a gas station several miles down the road. I called the police and recounted the horrifying encounter. They searched for the hitchhiker but found no trace of her. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped a sinister fate that night on the lonely highway. Second story, by Sarah Johnson. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, a cross-country road trip from New York to California. My best friend, Lisa, and I had been planning it for months, and we were excited to hit the open road. We had everything we needed, or so we thought. The first few days of our journey were incredible. We visited landmarks, explored small towns, and enjoyed the freedom of the open road. But as we ventured further west, things took a sinister turn. It happened in the desolate plains of Nebraska. Our car sputtered and coughed before finally coming to a complete stop on a lonely stretch of highway. Panic set in as we realized we were in the middle of nowhere with no cell service and no help in sight. We decided to pop the hood and take a look, hoping it was just a minor issue we could fix ourselves. As we huddled together in the fading daylight, a pickup truck approached from the distance. Relief washed over us as we waved them down. The truck pulled over, and 3 men stepped out. They were rugged, with weathered faces and cold, calculating eyes. Their presence sent a chill down my spine, but we were desperate for assistance. One of the men, the leader it seemed, approached us with a forced smile. "Need some help, ladies?" Relieved, we explained our situation, and he offered to take a look under the hood. Lisa and I exchanged wary glances but agreed. We stood back as he tinkered with the engine, while his two companions remained nearby, eyeing us intently. After what felt like an eternity, the man emerged from under the hood with a grim expression. "Looks like you've got a major problem here, ladies. It's gonna take a while to fix, and we can't leave you stranded out here in the dark." Lisa and I exchanged uneasy glances once more. The sun had already set, and the remote location made us vulnerable. We reluctantly accepted their offer to stay with them in their nearby cabin while they worked on our car. As we followed the men to their cabin, a sinking feeling settled in my gut. The place was isolated and eerily quiet. We were offered a meager dinner and a place to sleep, but something about the situation just didn't sit right. That night, as we lay in our makeshift beds, we overheard hushed conversations among the men outside the cabin. They spoke in low tones, and we strained to make out their words. What we heard sent shivers down our spines. They were discussing their plans for us. It was clear they had sinister intentions, and our survival instincts kicked into high gear. Lisa and I knew we had to escape before it was too late. Under the cover of darkness, we slipped out of our beds and made our way to the back door. We opened it as quietly as possible and crept into the woods. Our hearts pounded in our chests as we navigated through the darkness, guided only by the faint moonlight. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon a road and flagged down a passing car. We told the driver our harrowing story, and they immediately called the police. Lisa and I were rescued, and the men were arrested for their sinister plans. Our cross-country road trip had turned into a nightmare, a reminder that danger can lurk in even the most remote and unsuspecting places. Third story, by Mark Davis. It was a foggy autumn night, and I found myself driving through the dense forests of Oregon. The narrow road twisted and turned, surrounded by towering pine trees that seemed to reach up into the heavens. The solitude of the forest was eerie, and the only sound was the rhythmic hum of my car's engine. I had been driving for hours, trying to make it to a remote cabin I had rented for a weekend getaway. The directions were vague, and I was beginning to wonder if I had taken a wrong turn. But I pressed on, determined to reach my destination. As I rounded a bend in the road, I spotted something up ahead, a soft, flickering light that seemed out of place in the darkness of the forest. Intrigued, I slowed down and approached cautiously. To my astonishment, I stumbled upon a clearing in the woods where a group of people dressed in robes stood in a circle around a bonfire. The scene before me was chilling. The cult members were chanting in a language I couldn't understand, their voices rising and falling in an eerie cadence. They held candles and wore masks, their faces hidden from view. In the center of the circle was a large, ornate altar. My heart raced as I watched, hidden in the shadows. I had stumbled upon something sinister, something I had never expected to encounter in the middle of the forest. I debated whether to turn around and flee or to stay and see what they were doing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to stay hidden and observe. As the chanting reached a crescendo, the cult members raised their hands in unison, and the bonfire blazed even brighter. It was then that I saw it, a figure bound to the altar, their body contorted in pain. I couldn't see the person's face, but their cries were agonizing, and I knew I had to do something. But fear held me back, and I watched in horror as the cult members continued their ritual. Suddenly, a sharp twig snapped beneath my foot, and all eyes turned in my direction. Panic surged through me as I realized I had been discovered. The cult members' masked faces turned toward me, and I could see the malevolence in their eyes. Without hesitation, I turned and sprinted back to my car. The cult members gave chase, their chanting growing louder and more frenzied. I fumbled with my keys and finally managed to start the car just in time. Tires screeched as I sped away from the scene, leaving the cult and their dark ritual behind. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town, where I contacted the authorities and reported what I had witnessed. The police investigated the area but found no trace of the cult or their victim. To this day, I can't forget the haunting image of that clearing in the forest and the malevolent presence I had stumbled upon that night. Fourth story, by Emily Martinez. I had always been drawn to the desolation of the desert, and so I embarked on a solo road trip through the southwestern United States. The open road stretched before me, surrounded by miles of arid terrain. The scorching sun had given way to a relentless, unforgiving heat as I ventured deeper into the desert. As the day turned to evening, I found myself driving along a desolate stretch of highway with nothing but sand dunes in every direction. The isolation was suffocating, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. I knew I was far from any form of civilization, and the thought sent a chill down my spine. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed something strange in the distance, a peculiar glow on the horizon. It was an eerie, otherworldly light that seemed to pulse and shift in the darkness. Intrigued and a little unnerved, I decided to investigate. I parked my car on the side of the road and cautiously made my way toward the source of the light. The closer I got, the more surreal it became. The desert floor was covered in a luminous, swirling mist that seemed to defy all logic. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy that sent shivers down my spine. As I ventured further into the mist, I began to hear faint voices. They were distant and indistinct, but they seemed to beckon me closer. Against my better judgment, I followed the voices deeper into the glowing haze. And then I saw them, figures emerging from the mist, shrouded in robes and masks. Their presence was menacing, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had stumbled upon something inexplicable and dangerous. The voices grew louder, their chanting and incantations filling the air. Panic welled up inside me, and I turned to flee, but it was too late. The robed figures surrounded me, their hands reaching out to grab me. I struggled and fought, but their grip was unyielding, their strength unnatural. They dragged me toward the center of the mist, where a strange, ancient-looking altar stood. Symbols and markings covered its surface, and I could feel the malevolent energy emanating from it. I knew I was in the midst of something beyond comprehension. With a sudden surge of strength, I managed to break free and sprinted back toward my car. The figures gave chase, their eerie chants echoing in my ears. I sped away from the glowing mist, the desert landscape rushing past in a blur. I didn't stop driving until I reached a small town, where I reported the bizarre encounter to the local authorities. They investigated the area but found no trace of the strange phenomenon or the ominous figures. To this day, I can't explain what I witnessed in the desert, but the memory of that surreal night still haunts me. Fifth story, by David Thompson. It was a moonless night, and I found myself driving through the winding roads of the Appalachian Mountains. The dense forest closed in around me, and the only sound was the hum of my car's engine. I had always been drawn to the rugged beauty of the mountains, but that night, the isolation was palpable. I had been driving for hours, making my way through the narrow, winding roads that seemed to lead deeper and deeper into the wilderness. The towering trees and thick underbrush gave the impression that I was truly in the middle of nowhere. As I navigated a particularly sharp curve, I spotted something up ahead, a flickering light that seemed out of place in the darkness. I slowed down and approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. To my astonishment, I stumbled upon a small group of people gathered around a campfire. They were all dressed in dark clothing, and their faces were obscured by masks. They sat in a circle, their eyes fixed on the flames as they chanted in a language I couldn't understand. The atmosphere was thick with tension and unease. I debated whether to turn around and leave, but curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to stay hidden and observe. As I watched, the chanting grew more frenzied, and the flames of the campfire danced higher. Suddenly, one of the figures in the group stood and approached the center of the circle. They carried something in their hands, a small, wooden box that appeared ancient and ornate. The other figures fell silent as the person with the box began to speak, their voice filled with a chilling intensity. The box was opened, revealing a collection of strange, glowing symbols etched into its surface. The group's chanting grew even louder, and a sense of foreboding settled over me. It was clear that I had stumbled upon something dark and dangerous. As I continued to watch, I realized that I needed to document what I was seeing. I reached for my phone to take a picture, but in my haste, I accidentally dropped it, and it clattered loudly against the ground. The figures turned toward the sound, and panic surged through me. Without hesitation, I turned and sprinted back to my car, but I could hear the cult members giving chase, their chanting growing louder and more menacing. I fumbled with my keys and managed to start the car just in time. Tires screeched as I sped away from the scene, leaving the cult and their dark ritual behind. I didn't stop driving until I reached a nearby town, where I reported the encounter to the authorities. The police investigated the area but found no trace of the sinister group or their ritual. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped a malevolent presence in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Sixth Story, by Laura Anderson. It was a sweltering summer night in the heart of Texas, and I was driving alone on a long, desolate highway. The stars above were the only source of illumination, casting an eerie glow on the endless road ahead. My air conditioning had given up hours ago, leaving me drenched in sweat as I pressed on. I had just passed through a small, nearly deserted town, and the road ahead seemed to stretch on forever. The isolation was unsettling, and the distant howl of a lone coyote added to my unease. I was beginning to regret taking this shortcut through the remote countryside. As I continued to drive, I noticed a group of motorcycles approaching from behind. They were loud and intimidating, their engines roaring in the night. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, my heart racing as they closed in on me. The bikers pulled up alongside my car, and I could feel their menacing presence. They wore leather jackets adorned with patches and tattoos that told a story of their rough lifestyle. It was clear that this was no ordinary group of bikers. One of them, a burly man with a shaved head and a sinister grin, leaned out and motioned for me to pull over. Panic surged through me as I considered my options. There was nowhere to turn off the road, and I was trapped. Reluctantly, I pulled over to the side of the highway, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The bikers surrounded my car, their menacing figures casting long shadows in the darkness. I rolled down the window, my voice shaking as I asked what they wanted. The leader of the group, the man with the shaved head, leaned in close and spoke in a low, threatening tone. "You're gonna do us a little favor, sweetheart." Fear gripped me as I listened to his demands. It was clear that they had sinister intentions, and I had no choice but to comply. They instructed me to drive to a remote location deep in the countryside, and I knew that my only chance of survival was to do as they said. As I followed the directions, the darkness closed in around us, and my heart pounded in my chest. The road became narrower and more treacherous, leading us further into the wilderness. The isolation was suffocating, and I feared that this would be the end of the line. But then, in a stroke of luck, I saw the distant glow of a small gas station up ahead. It was my only chance to escape the clutches of the bikers. With a burst of adrenaline, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped toward the gas station, leaving the bikers in the dust. I burst into the gas station, breathless and trembling, and pleaded for help. The attendant called the police, and they arrived shortly thereafter. The bikers were apprehended, and it was revealed that they were involved in criminal activities far more sinister than I could have imagined. My late-night drive on that remote Texas highway had turned into a harrowing ordeal, a reminder that danger can lurk in unexpected places. Seventh Story by Michael Turner. It was a cool, clear night in California, and I was driving alone on a deserted highway that wound its way through the rugged landscape. The stars above were bright, and the moon cast eerie shadows on the empty road. I had been on the road for hours, and exhaustion was starting to set in. As I navigated the twists and turns of the highway, I spotted something up ahead, a figure standing by the side of the road, waving frantically. I slowed down and approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a young woman, her clothes disheveled, and her face etched with fear. Relief washed over her as I pulled over, and she practically jumped into the car, her breathless thanks filling the air. She explained that her car had broken down, leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere. She seemed genuinely distraught, and I couldn't help but feel sympathy for her. As we continued down the highway, she began to share her story. She told me about her journey, how she had been driving through the night to visit her family in a nearby town. But then she had encountered a group of menacing individuals at a rest stop. According to her, the strangers had followed her onto the highway, and she had been trying to outrun them ever since. She described their sinister appearance and threatening gestures, painting a chilling picture of her ordeal. My unease grew as I listened to her tale, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was not quite right. It was late, and there was no one else on the road. I had a sinking feeling that we were not alone. As we drove on, I noticed a car in my rearview mirror, its headlights flickering menacingly. The woman's eyes widened in terror, and she whispered, "They found us." My heart raced as the car behind us closed in, and I knew I had to act quickly. I veered off the highway onto a narrow dirt road that led into the wilderness. The pursuit was relentless, and the strangers in the car behind us followed without hesitation. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I pushed my car to its limits, navigating the treacherous terrain in the darkness. The woman beside me was in tears, her fear palpable. We couldn't outrun our pursuers forever. But then, as we rounded a bend in the dirt road, we spotted the distant lights of a police car. Relief flooded over us, and I flashed my headlights and honked my horn to signal for help. The pursuing car abruptly turned and disappeared into the night. The police arrived moments later, and the woman and I recounted our harrowing encounter. They searched the area but found no trace of the menacing individuals. To this day, I can't forget the chilling tale of the stranded woman on the California highway and the terrifying pursuit that followed. Eighth story, by Jennifer Adams. It was a moonless night in the deserts of Arizona, and I was driving alone on a remote highway that seemed to stretch on endlessly. The desert landscape was desolate, with nothing but cacti and sand dunes as far as the eye could see. The isolation was suffocating, and the only sound was the hum of my car's engine. I had been on the road for hours, making my way through the arid expanse, when something peculiar caught my eye. Up ahead, in the middle of the highway, there was a strange, pulsating light. It danced and flickered, casting an eerie glow on the desert floor. As I approached, I could see that the light was unlike anything I had ever encountered. It seemed to defy the laws of physics, shifting and morphing in ways that were impossible to explain. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy that sent shivers down my spine. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowed down to get a closer look. I could feel a strange, magnetic pull, as if the light was drawing me toward it. It was hypnotic and unnerving all at once. I parked my car on the side of the highway and cautiously stepped out, my eyes fixed on the mysterious phenomenon. The desert air was still and silent, and I could feel the weight of the moment. As I approached the pulsating light, it began to emit a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to reverberate through my very bones. It was as if the desert itself was alive and speaking to me in a language I couldn't comprehend. I reached out to touch the light, my fingers trembling as they made contact with the strange energy. In that moment, I felt a surge of power and understanding, as if the universe had revealed its secrets to me. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the pulsating light vanished, leaving me standing alone in the darkness of the desert. Confusion and fear washed over me as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I returned to my car, my mind racing with questions and uncertainty. Had I experienced a supernatural phenomenon or encountered something beyond human comprehension? To this day, I can't explain the strange encounter on the remote Arizona highway, but the memory of that pulsating light haunts me. Ninth story, by Rachel Turner. It was a chilly night in the vast deserts of Nevada, and I was driving alone on a remote stretch of highway. The moon cast an eerie glow on the barren landscape, and the only sound was the howling wind. I had been on the road for hours, making my way through the desolation. As I continued to drive, I spotted something up ahead, a group of people standing by the side of the highway, their expressions filled with fear and desperation. I slowed down and approached cautiously, my headlights revealing their haggard faces. They were a mismatched group of travelers, their clothes torn and dirty. Their car was parked on the shoulder, its engine dead. It was clear that they had been stranded in the unforgiving desert for some time. I rolled down my window and asked if they needed help. The group explained that their car had broken down, and they had been walking for miles in search of assistance. They seemed genuinely distraught, and I couldn't leave them stranded in the middle of nowhere. I offered to give them a ride to the nearest town, which was still several miles away. Gratitude washed over them as they piled into my car, their faces etched with relief. They began to share their story, and it was more chilling than I could have imagined. According to the group, they had been on a cross-country road trip, but their journey had taken a sinister turn when they encountered a group of menacing individuals at a rest stop. The strangers had threatened them and chased them into the desert, leaving them stranded and terrified. As we drove toward the nearest town, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. The wind howled outside, and the desolation of the desert seemed to close in around us. I glanced in the rearview mirror and spotted a pair of headlights in the distance. Panic welled up inside me as the headlights grew closer, and I realized that the menacing individuals who had pursued the group were still on their trail. They were relentless and determined to catch up with us. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I pushed my car to its limits, desperate to outrun our pursuers. The travelers in my car were in tears, their fear palpable. The pursuit was relentless, and I feared for our lives. But then, just when it seemed like we were about to be caught, we reached the outskirts of the town, and the headlights behind us abruptly turned and disappeared into the darkness. Relief washed over us, and I knew we had narrowly escaped a horrifying fate. I dropped the group off at a local motel, and they thanked me profusely for saving them from the sinister individuals who had pursued them. To this day, I can't forget the chilling tale of the stranded travelers in the Nevada desert and the terrifying pursuit that followed. 10th Story by Daniel Mitchell. It was a clear, starry night in the deserts of New Mexico, and I was driving alone on a deserted stretch of highway. The road stretched out before me, flanked by endless sand dunes and cacti. The isolation was eerie, and the only sound was the hum of my car's engine. I had been on the road for hours, making my way through the vast desert landscape, when I spotted something up ahead, a peculiar, neon-lit sign. It was unlike anything I had seen before in the middle of nowhere, and it seemed to beckon me closer. As I approached, I could see that the sign advertised a roadside attraction, a bizarre and unsettling one. It read, "The Museum of Oddities. See the Unexplained." The words were illuminated in eerie, flickering neon, casting an otherworldly glow in the darkness. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to pull over and investigate. I parked my car by the side of the highway and made my way toward the entrance of the museum. The night air was still, and a sense of unease settled over me. The museum was housed in a rundown building, its windows broken and its paint peeling. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The interior was dimly lit, and a sense of foreboding settled over me. The exhibits were bizarre and unsettling, to say the least. There were strange, taxidermied creatures with multiple heads, jars filled with unidentifiable specimens, and eerie wax figures frozen in disturbing poses. It was a macabre collection of oddities that sent shivers down my spine. As I ventured further into the museum, I noticed a series of paintings on the wall. They depicted strange and surreal scenes, a desolate desert landscape, a sinister figure lurking in the shadows, and an ominous portal to another dimension. The longer I looked at the paintings, the more unsettling they became. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me, a low, guttural growl. I turned to see a hooded figure standing in the shadows, their face obscured by darkness. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was not alone in the museum. The hooded figure approached me slowly, their steps deliberate and menacing. I tried to back away, but I found myself surrounded by the bizarre exhibits, trapped in the nightmarish museum. The figure spoke in a low, raspy voice, reciting cryptic and unsettling phrases. It was clear that they were not of this world, and I was in the presence of something beyond human comprehension. With a burst of adrenaline, I made a run for it, pushing my way past the exhibits and out of the museum. I sprinted back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest, and sped away from the eerie roadside attraction. To this day, I can't explain the bizarre encounter in the New Mexico desert, but the memory of the Museum of Oddities and the hooded figure still haunts me. Thank you for sticking with us through the whole video. Also, I recommend you this video you see on screen, one of the scariest on my channel. If you haven't already, Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. This helps me bring you more thrilling content every day. If this video sent shivers down your spine, let me know in the comments.